If we group humans into two categories, the rich versus the poor, we can make more than a couple of distinctions. Choices that the rich make directly affect the poor and everyone else in between, from price points to setting the atmosphere of the market to dictating what industries are in demand. A bad decision a wealthier person makes will never have as much of a negative impact on their lives as that of a poor person. A person in poverty, in many countries, poverty means living on 99 cents a day, and I think in first world countries, the terms low income and poverty are often used hand in hand. However, they are obviously two very separate things that need to be addressed like both separately. The term poverty has to be explained in different contexts. Obviously poverty in a developing country is going to be a lot different than poverty in a developed country. So low income individuals and families aren't living on necessarily exactly 99 cents a day, and their standard of living is higher in comparison to that of someone who lives on 99 cents a day in a developing country. But capitalistic societies cause those in middle and low incomes to be extremely influenced by the rich, and they are very likely to drive themselves into poverty-like conditions, even being unable to access resources that may seem easy to access but could be quite difficult for the person who didn't have the time to build up their muscle that is financial literacy. You often hear finance influencers talk about that money mindset. I do believe growing your income or creating a saving habit takes a change in mindset, just like any other aspect of your life, including fitness, confidence, even learning to study better. However, getting to this point where all you're worried about is your mindset is either your lack of financial literacy talking or your extreme privilege talking. Let me explain. I used to think that money mindset was just an illiterate way of saying financial literacy. Financial literacy, according to Investopedia, is the ability to understand and effectively use various financial skills, including personal financial management, budgeting, and investing. When you are financially literate, you have the foundation of a relationship with money, and it is a lifelong journey of learning. Developed countries often dictate their socioeconomic status through things like GDP and how many people can read, basic literacy. This is a very flawed way of determining a country's wealth because we are not evaluating people's standard of living, how bad the wealth disparity is, how easy it is to access opportunities, the cost of living in that country. None of these things are talked about when we are discussing how wealthy a country is, at least at the global scale. When people talk about travel and maybe living somewhere foreign, these may be discussed, but if countries were truly evaluated this way, then leaders wouldn't be determining the wealth of their country based on GDP, and they would be making policy decisions that reflected this level of thinking. It's obvious that governments prioritize that stupid fucking number rather than really reflecting on the factors that are keeping people stuck in lower socioeconomic classes. In not just the Tamil community or immigrant communities, in many families, parents financially abuse their children and then convince their kids that it's something to be proud of because they are helping their family out, when in reality, children are being severely disadvantaged in comparison to their peers because of parents who are using their children as resources rather than providing their kids with resources. The biggest hurdle here is the fact that parents groom their children into thinking this is okay. If you go to one of these kids and tell them to stop giving their parents money or else you're going to exacerbate their financial issues, they are also too financially illiterate to understand. Especially in immigrant communities, you're taught that toxic loyalty is good for you until you're screwed over. Then you're like, oh, the people talking about socioeconomic class were right. For me, the issue with my family was you make money and you give it back to the family because of how much they helped you out. I have always been trapped in codependency patterns with my family because of how much I felt like I owed them. But here's the thing, if a parent or guardian is making someone younger than them feel like they owe them, especially in regards to things like an education and food, that person truly doesn't care about you. They just care about how good and generous they look. Making people feel like they should be grateful, that's not love. That's you desperately clinging on to somebody who you think is your last resource. You fawn over them and manipulate them to make them feel loved, only to have them believe that now their life is indebted to you. In immigrant families, we are often told to be incredibly grateful of our parents. The problem with this is we aren't taught that you can be both grateful and still be critical. When we idolize our parents, we blind ourselves to their trauma-based behaviors, and we never stop the passing down of intergenerational trauma. It is not fair that many demographics have to deal with the beast that is intergenerational trauma. It's terrible, and it puts people at a severe disadvantage. Kids coming from such environments adopt behaviors their peers would never even fathom, and as a result, you have created wealth wealth disparity right from the get-go. We often think wealth disparity starts when you start making income, but it starts when you're a kid. From the moment someone else has provided with more or less opportunity over things an individual cannot change, like when they were born, their physique, race, baseline intelligence, which is also heavily dependent on parents and the home environment, we often assume you're either smart or you're not. You're either diligent or you're not. Nope. It's all opportunity. Literally everyone is capable. So the moment you look at someone and believe they are less capable than you, that is either your ableism or your privilege from socioeconomic class speaking. Equal opportunity is what will lessen wealth disparity. Our education systems exacerbate the problem. You drive kids into clinical burnout before they're 25 and wonder why suicide rates are up, why the debt crisis is so high, why there are so many people gaining an income, yet so many people losing their homes. We are just continuing to feed into a system that will only eventually fail us all, but most of us don't want to care because it doesn't matter right now. For example, retirement. You can imagine retiring all you want, but the truth is if you didn't consistently invest over your lifetime, you are most likely either going to be living off of your kids or living in poverty. This is not just your parents, this is you too. It is almost impossible for many working class people to save for retirement on top of all their responsibilities. It's easy to push Dave Ramsey's advice on somebody and say you should just eat rice and beans and skimp until you're debt free or your income increases. This is the worst advice I've ever heard in my life. FYI, I did this. In the middle of uni, living in a frat house, I was paying back debt, sleeping on the floor because my air mattress didn't work. I was giving money to my parents. I was working 2 jobs, and somehow I managed to make it to some of my summer school courses. Around the same time, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but I also discovered I had a knack for character design. When I came home exhausted, sometimes I would skip eating, just smoke weed, watch Sailor Moon, and draw. As poor as I felt in those moments, those were some of the most fulfilling moments in my life. I had never worked so hard to improve at a skill until then, not even school. I didn't realize how much diligence and discipline, art, and creativity pulled out of me. Something in me shifted that summer. Therapy played a huge role in me getting through all of that, but I stopped going because I was embarrassed. I'm pretty sure I entered clinical burnout, and this eventually led me to dropping out of uni. I remember in the drive-thru at one of my jobs at 3 a.m., this one guy, when he found out I was a student, he told me, "Don't worry, you got a good life ahead of you." I had a hard time believing that one. My life did get better, although I still cycled through poverty more than a couple times even after that season. Now I realized I lacked financial literacy and that my mental health issues exacerbated my money issues. But my schedule was so jam-packed that I had no room to even make room for therapy, let alone sit down and watch finance podcasts. TFD Access Therapy and a financial podcast all in one. I highly recommend. I remember a therapist kind of scoffed at me for having to work nights. That shit made me so depressed. At the time, I had no understanding of financial literacy. All I knew was you work so you can make money and you use that money for school and shit. I didn't understand how much blue-collar work could affect your schooling. I didn't understand what burnout even was. Our culture and our society encourages burnout. It pushes us toward mental health issues. I have had to make so many choices to create the life I have today. Like so many hard fucking choices. I was lucky to stumble upon many advantages, but I've also felt severely disadvantaged. And I'm going to tell you now, the hard choices don't stop, but it gets easier to make them. Even though there were times where I was severely disadvantaged in comparison to my peers, I found myself giving up my power and convincing myself that I didn't deserve advantages that came my way in fear that I would be judged for obtaining luck or advantages in my situation. Self-worth plays a big role in this. If your self-esteem runs a little low when it comes to money or mental health-wise it's kind of tough for you, you're less likely to seek out good financial resources. If you want to improve with money, it's important to look at financial literacy like fitness or education or nutrition. Just like you would set aside 30 minutes to read or 30 minutes to work out, set aside 30 minutes to listen to or read a really credible resource on money. As much as it sucks, the truth is the system of money isn't going to be abolished anytime soon, and it's important that we criticize a capitalist system while still learning to give ourselves what we deserve. And you deserve it all. Don't you forget it. Emotional regulation, the ability to stay calm and not fall deep into emotions that have to do with fear and anxiety, usually come with a certain socioeconomic status or a life of zero trauma and hardship. Parents teaching their kids to be emotionally regulated or providing them with access to resources that allow them to learn to be is not seen everywhere. As I grew up, some kids would speak to me about how their family would make them go to therapy, and that definitely sounds traumatizing, but I come from a family where therapy is seen as a bad thing. I think it was hard to not be envious of those who spoke about child therapy so terribly, because I came from a culture where when you see kids fall behind, you let them fall behind because they're not resilient enough. If you can't do it without therapy, you aren't strong enough for this family or for the society in the first place. That's what the culture is like. Even if a kid looks like they need it, you just pretend like you don't see anything. It was quite hard not to be jealous of kids who spoke about going to therapy as these big traumatic events, because I know so many kids whose parents look at therapy as literally evil. That being said, look, therapy is daunting and overwhelming, and it's a process. It's just that it's also like me being able to go to therapy is an immense privilege. And puts me I'm in an incredibly advantageous position because I can even get therapy. Does that make sense? Anyways, okay. Emotional regulation is really important in regards to financial literacy. In terms of saving and investing, it requires a good handle on your mental health, a privilege not everyone has. The less money you have, the more of an impact it has on your mental health when you're trying to get ahead. A lot of these people saying it's not about money, you don't need money to be happy, are talking about high amounts of disposable income to buy your little trinkets on Amazon. You need a good place to live. You need good food to eat. You need to do things that allow you to feel good about yourself. And you deserve to have these things without being judged by your community on whether you deserve them or not. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi explains disorder in consciousness in his book Flow. In a factory that produces audiovisual equipment, Julio Martinez is working on the assembly line and is distracted, is struggling to keep up, and is slowing down the line. Usually, he can do his part of the job with time to spare and then relax for a while to exchange a few jokes before the next unit stops at his station. But today, he is struggling. When the man at the next station kids him about it, Julio snaps back irritably. From morning to quitting time, tension keeps building, and it spills over to his relationship with his coworkers. Julio's problem is simple, almost trivial, but it has been weighing heavily on his mind. One evening, a few days earlier, he noticed on arriving home from work that one of his tires was quite low. The next morning, the rim of the wheel was almost touching the ground. Julio would not receive his paycheck till the end of the following week, and he was certain he would not have enough money until then to have the tire patched up, let alone buy a new one. Credit was something he had not yet learned to use. The factory was out in the suburbs, about 20 miles from where he lived, and he simply had to reach it by 8 a.m. The only solution Julio could think of was to drive gingerly to the service station in the morning, fill the tire with air, and then drive back to work as quickly as possible. After work, the tire was low again, so he inflated it at a gas station near the factory and drove home. He had been doing this for 3 days, hoping the procedure would work until the next paycheck. But today, by the time he made it to the factory, he would hardly steer the car because the wheel with the bum tire was so flat. All through the day, he worried, will I make it home tonight? How will I get to work tomorrow morning? These questions kept intruding in his mind, disrupting concentration on his work and throwing a pall on his moods. Julio is a good example of what happens when the internal order of the self is disrupted.